Joining me now, though, with more reaction to these stories about welfare cuts out today is the Shadow Families Minister, Kevin Andrews. Mr Andrews, thank you for your time. Does the opposition approve of this stick-over-carrot approach to getting single parents off welfare and back into the workforce?
Ashley, can I say a few things about this? Firstly, we will reserve our judgment until we see the detail of what's being proposed, because this is a government which has shown repeatedly to have spin over substance, so we'll want to see the detail of it. Secondly, in relation to the parents, just 2 months ago the government put in legislation in which it said it was totally appropriate and proper for the person to come off the parenting payment when the oldest child turned 12. 2 months later, it's now down to 8, and one has to ask why the change between 8 and 12 in the space of 2 months. The answer is quite clear. This is simply another way in which this government is scrambling to find money in order to deliver Mr Swan's surplus. So we will look at it. But thirdly, the question also remains of what is the government going to do to help these people who will be coming off the parenting payment. On the calculations I've been able to make this morning, people will lose between probably $150 and $250 a fortnight in many cases. Now, when we introduced welfare reform in 2005, we actually spent $3.2 billion to make sure that there were programs so that people could get into education, they could get into employment and the like. So if this is just a cash grab and there are no programs to help these people, then this is going to make it very difficult for a lot of Australians who may well be struggling now in a situation in which we see jobs.
The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, there speaking in Melbourne, not giving too much more away about Tuesday's budget. We all are also, to let you know, saying bye for a live news conference with the Treasurer, Wayne Swan, who perhaps may give some more details on this story that we're reporting on today to do with welfare cuts for single parents. And before the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, started speaking there, we were having a chat with the Shadow Families Minister, Kevin Andrews, who's still with us from Melbourne. Mr Andrews, you were going through some of the concerns you have about these reports. My understanding is that a lot of single parents are actually already on the New Start allowance, and the move that's foreshadowed in today's reports really only affects people who were receiving these parenting payments before July 2006. Wasn't it the Howard government that introduced the change in the first place, and what the Gillard government is doing now is effectively making it one rule for all, which seems fairer on the basis of that?
The point I'm making, Ashley, is this. It's appropriate that people who are capable of working are in work. And so the changes we made in 2005, 2006 were to encourage parents whose youngest child was turning between 6 and 8 to go into work. Now, these changes are for that group, as you point out, that weren't covered by the 2005-6 changes. But the point I'm making is twofold. Number one, 2 months ago, the government said the age that was appropriate was 12, now it's 8. What's the reason? Simply they've got to find more money for this budget. But the second one is that in 2005-6, what we did was that we put funds forward to assist these people. If this is just a cash grab and there's no assistance provided for people who are going to lose up to $250 a fortnight, then that's going to be very difficult for a lot of people in circumstances in which people are actually losing jobs at the present time. If the government hadn't wasted so much money on pink bats and the like, then it might be in a different situation. But it's quite clear that part of this budget is going to be finding money from wherever it can be found. If that's appropriate, then we will support it. But if it's just a cash grab and it's not providing the assistance, well then I think many in the community will say this is inappropriate.
It does appear from these reports that people going onto the New Start allowance will be given some form of job, career counselling and assistance to find jobs. But of course, the details will all have to wait until Tuesday. More broadly, Mr Andrews, what are you expecting when it comes to any cuts to middle-class welfare? We all know, of course, the Treasurer is aiming for a surplus. Do you expect that we will see further cuts to that group of welfare, often described as middle-class welfare, and should that be a target?
This government has obviously aimed at a lot of middle-class people in Australia. If you look at what it's done in relation to health insurance, for example, what it's attempted to do in a range of areas, it's quite obviously aimed its sights at a lot of ordinary working Australian families. Now, we will look at each of these measures and the detail of it. As I said, every time you hear an announcement from the government, we just heard the Prime Minister before on the NDIS talking about test sites. Well, this is not the full implementation of the NDIS. This sounds to me like they're going to fund some pilots around the country. So everything the government says, everything the Prime Minister says is covered in so much spin these days that you have to wait until you see the detail to actually understand the substance of what they're going to do. So we will look very carefully at the detail of the budget next week to see whether or not what's being promised is actually what's going to be delivered.
Just to pick you up on that, though, Mr Andrews, the Coalition supports the NDIS. This does have bipartisan support, doesn't it? Wouldn't you welcome the fact that the Prime Minister is rolling out these test sites a year earlier than the Productivity Commission did initially suggest? Isn't that something Mr Abbott's already welcomed?
We welcome the NDIS. We're fully behind the NDIS, as we are behind any sensible moves to take people off welfare and get them into work. We're fully committed to that. But the point I'm making is you simply can't believe on face value anything that the Prime Minister says these days. If she's seeking to give the impression that somehow the Commonwealth by itself is rolling out the NDIS over the next year, well then that would be a misleading impression. And that would be unfair to the very people who have their high hopes set on this scheme being put in place. We support the scheme, we want to see it in operation, but we don't want to give false impressions to people, particularly the parents of children and young people and even older people who have got profound disabilities, that somehow magically overnight this is going to occur. It'd be better for the Prime Minister to actually be truthful and say, yes, these are some pilots. Once we get the pilots in place, then we can go to the next step. But always there's this spin about, you know, we're going to just have some sites, but this is in the context that somehow the government is going to be rolling this out immediately. What I'm saying is people distrust the Prime Minister and we distrust the Prime Minister, and that's why we will look at the detail. We're in favour of the proposition. We've given a lot of support. In fact, Tony Abbott has said that we should have a joint parliamentary chaired committee in order to roll this out, because it's going to take probably 2 or 3 terms of Parliament. And in addition, we'll need the states and the territories totally on board and funding it to get it underway.
Kevin Andrews, we appreciate your time on Newsday this afternoon. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure, Ashley.
To our other top story.